Against all the evil that hell can conjure, all the wickedness that mankind can produce, we will send unto them only you. Rip and tear until it is done.
Rogue Trader is fantastic. It feels like a greatest hits collection of Warhammer 40k, or a theme park ride in much the same vein Resident Evil Village was, taking you through the best the setting has to offer as the developers flex their creator muscles, not to mention a clear love for the fiction. I'm not super versed in 40k, and that theme park ride feeling is something we'll get into more with the story later on, but it's hard to deny how good it feels to be walking around and actively living out the fantasy of one of the few people who get a remotely comfortable life in the grimdark future, not to mention the insane wealth and influence to match. If the aesthetic appeal wasn't enough, don't worry, because Rogue Trader might even surpass Wrath of the Righteous with an absolutely insane power curve. You're going to be wiping out groups of enemies in one action, stacking on one attack after another, and the loot is yet another part of the kind of trip that just might leave you feeling like a god emperor yourself. That was just hyperbole, I swear. Please, don't call the Inquisition on me. Please, please, please. Terra knows I've made my feelings about Wrath of the Righteous well and truly clear by now, but although it was only this year where Rogue Trader finally pulled me in, Alcat continues to go from strength to strength. Baldur's Gate fans got the best CRPG in decades. Now the Warhammer 40k crowd can finally live out their dreams without having to stump up a kidney for the privilege. Rogue Trader is just endlessly cool. An excellent cast of characters, beautiful environments, so much loot you won't know what to do with yourself, and a power curve in both gameplay and narrative progression that builds your dynasty up from nothing. This is just about as good as it gets. It's not perfect, but I'll be damned if it doesn't give this XCOM diehard a thrill. With Dark Heresy on the horizon, let's finally have a look at what Warhammer 40,000's first RPG has to offer and what awaits us in the grim darkness. Although I do miss the toggle between turn-based and real-time with pause from Wrath, it's hard to deny that Rogue Trader makes its combat systems feel amazing. Hell, it might even rival XCOM 2 as a first in the genre of not just tactics, but turn-based porn, with the kind of numbers and stacking effects you'll be seeing on screen. It's filthy, bordering on OP really, and it's absolutely glorious. The ruinous powers are supposedly bringing their best, but that pales in comparison to the kind of firepower you've got. Parry enemies and hit them until they explode. Chain critical sniper shots together as you vaporize one enemy after another. Or Cassia's Eye can wipe out entire mobs in a single action. It's so good. In other tactics games, the player is typically given one or two major actions per turn, and that's about it. But Rogue Trader is on a whole other level. Archetypes, this game's equivalent to classes, all come with ways to give either yourself or another party member an extra full turn, heroic actions for even more, extra ways to move, buff the living hell out of everyone, and keep going and going and going. It's legitimately insane. Take this example. The ring you can get from Calcazar is easily the best item in the game for the momentum increase and buffs, then we position Cassia where the eye will hit the most targets, and done. And this is on daring difficulty, by the way. If anything, Rogue Trader may be a little too overpowered, and this was after the recent 1.5 update that brought the overleveling down significantly. Play a Pyro Psyker if you want to feel like a god that wipes out everything on screen, or spec Ulfar, Ilias, and Argenta into crits, and you'll be getting some crazy damage numbers. I made a video a while back talking about fun over balance, and Rogue Trader is a perfect example of this. Build crafting fans, min-maxers, or just people casually dipping their toes into RPGs for the first time will all find something to love here. All of this makes combat feel amazing to pull off, even trash mobs that you'll vaporize before they even know what hit them. Of course, part of that is the item progression. As mentioned already, you're going to be drowning in gear that will have you armed to the teeth and with plenty of cargo left over to trade in for the major factions. As part of living the Rogue Trader fantasy, you don't have currency like other games. Instead, the wealth and power at your command is so obscene, it's simply measured in the prerequisite profit factor. You can buy out entire planets in the blink of an eye, and a Rogue Trader is practically a king as everyone kneels before you and the God Emperor given right in the warrant of trade. The faction reputation system is an interesting twist compared to the Crusade management of Wrath. Some of the best items of the game are available at the higher tiers, such as this laser rifle that annihilates everything with a burst attack, or decking your void ship out with the best tech available in the Expanse. There's also a fairly in-depth colony management system on top of this as you establish projects and acquire resources for the major planets under Von Valancius control. A lot of these buffs are nice to have and don't really get good until much later on in the game, and I don't think it's that fleshed out when compared to the Crusade in Wrath of the Righteous. Nevertheless, it's still a neat little layer on top. Probably the most controversial or least popular addition to Rogue Trader is Void Ship Combat. Now, I'm one of the few who actually enjoyed the Heroes of Might and Magic style encounters in Wrath of the Righteous, and I can say for the most part, it's a similar thing here. Positioning is king, as you need to keep range, shield strength, and what side of the ship is facing which enemy combatants in mind. Much like combat as well, you're going to be very powerful with some of the later buffs and attacks that upgrading the Void Ship offers too. I can definitely see why it's not as popular when it takes players out of the main story, companions going from planet to planet, and so forth. So let's talk about probably the biggest issue with Rogue Trader that'll catch new players out: the speed of actions. Aside from the bugs and the worst launch I personally sat through for Owlcats games, the main reason I bounced off Rogue Trader at the time was how goddamn slow everything was. Part of this comes back to what I said earlier about missing the toggle from Wrath, but because every party member, every enemy can stack multiple actions, use items, move, and so on each and every turn, it's easy for things to start dragging when you just want it to be over with already. Void Ship Combat was the worst for this because of how goddamn slow ships are, even in the endgame. Don't get me wrong, I understand why the game is turn-based, obviously that's how the tabletop is played, but it ultimately felt like the game wasn't valuing my time, especially for a big, sprawling RPG that will take most people upwards of 50 to 100 hours to complete. Thankfully, now that combat has been vastly overhauled and fixed up compared to what it was at launch and most of the kinks ironed out, Rogue Trader feels a hell of a lot better. And if you're one of the people finding each and every character's turn or void ship starting to drag, let me show you how to fix it in one easy step: the spacebar. If only players running their million-point strong armies in the tabletop had that option too. At risk of sounding like a broken record here, it never ceases to amaze me how well Owlcat pushes the Unity engine into making their games look their best. Like Wrath of the Righteous before it, Rogue Trader shines in its visuals and art direction. From sinister bunkers crawling with gene stealers, to lush Eldari forests, to the nightmarish pits of Drukhari architecture, to the grand, sprawling megastructures of the Imperium, to the sickly, decayed hell of Nurgle's corruption, Rogue Trader is a feat feast for the eyes, and I can only imagine what it's like for long-time fans of 40k to be walking around in these environments. The lighting, naturally, plays a big part in the atmosphere too. Warhammer's gothic, cathedral-esque vibes, the need for candles and incense absolutely everywhere they can fit it, is utterly unique, and it's clear that Owlcat put great care into helping realize the work of artists like John Blanche. There's nothing quite like 40k. Void ships that are more akin to floating cathedrals, palaces of gold and steel that were built on the backs of an untold number of slaves, and the nightmarish manifestations of chaos in the warp. Just like Wrath of the Righteous, however, this has come at the cost of performance. Given that this is a turn-based game, you're much less likely to have a billion particle effects exploding on screen all at once, but even while exploring the environment, the frame rate can be choppy at times. This is nothing game-breaking per se, but there's no way round it, as a mechanically deep and sprawling epic of a game pushes Unity to its limit. But hey, maybe it's just the machine spirit feeling a bit out of sorts. Rogue Trader is in a much better state than it was at release. Like Wrath, I was there eagerly waiting at day one, but I wasn't joking when I said it was the worst launch I've personally been through. Actions would inexplicably end mid-turn, activated abilities would refuse to work with some generic unavailable notification on screen, combat was bordering on unplayable. Compared to Wrath of the Righteous at release, the only major things I remember running into were I couldn't unlock the final mythic level 10 for Angel and some quests got stuck in the journal, but it was otherwise a complete, relatively smooth game from start to finish. Obviously in the 2 years since then, Owlcat have done a lot with ironing out the issues this game had, improving stability, and yes, sadly making the bosses harder to kill in a turn or two, which made me laugh at how insanely overpowered it was. So for most players, it won't matter what the game used to be like. Still, it's something worth noting. I've said this before, but just because I might lob these games when compared to others, a rough launch is a rough launch. For the sake of consistency and better standards in the industry, we should expect better from all developers. And if there's a repeat of this for Dark Heresy, Owlcat have already well and truly burned through their goodwill. Anyway, now that the more technical stuff is out of the way and the machine spirits are satisfied, let's get to the good stuff. Because what would a party-based RPG be without your party to venture forth? The cast of characters in Rogue Trader once again harkens back to the Greatest Hits collection I mentioned at the beginning. I can't tell you what a relief it is to not see another goddamn Ultramarine for once, but either way, Owlcat's writing team did a stellar job once again. If anything, the companions here are more consistent and a stronger cast overall than Wrath. Like last time, I'll run through this in the order they're recruited, so starting off, let's talk about our man, Abelard. Abelard is beloved by everyone in the community, and for good reason. It's not just the memes or some in-joke, he really is the rock on which the whole party revolves around. Warrior Vanguard means he can give as good as he gets. Wall of Rockcrease will shrug off damage that would have otherwise killed you instantly, and give your trusty Seneschal dual weapons and boots that allow him to attack on parry, and he's practically unstoppable. Pair this with the fact he's trained in Medicae, and the first companion you'll pick up at the very beginning of the game, Abelard is the all-reliable of the group. No wonder Theodora took him everywhere she went. There is seriously no reason not to have him with you basically all the time. He can tank, he can heal, he can do multiple attacks, and critically hit, and parry literal demons like it's nothing, and he'll still be back in time for dinner too. What a guy. As a character, he's similarly dependable. Abelard is the voice of reason and intimately familiar with the goings-on in your ship and protectorate. Formerly a member of the Imperial Navy, it seems like there's little our Seneschal can't do, but his questline starts to explore his blind spots and his resistance to change. Abelard is a great example of the kind of character on which the whole Imperium turns. He is loyal to a fault, by the book, and can be a stick in the mud at times, but he's consistent, reliable, and as he so often likes to say, proudly I might add,
Your seneschal is always there for you.
He's a family man as much as in service to the von Valancius bloodline, so the accusation of the Wersarian family committing treason and other charges is obviously an affront to his reputation. The fact Clementia is his granddaughter is wild. Clearly he's been at this for a very, very long time, but the quest itself is straightforward and reaffirms Abelard and his family as true loyalists to the rogue trader. Simply put, there's hardly a bad word to say about him. He's incredibly strong mechanically, a tank for damage while the rest of your party can wail on enemies, and a mainstay throughout the story. Clearly we didn't need Ursarkar or Celestine or Trazyn or anyone at Cadia. All they had to do was station Abelard on the planet, and the Eye of Terror would have closed itself. If you're at all familiar with 40k lore, you'll know that Psykers are essentially ticking time bombs for corruption. Idira is this to a T, because while her divination abilities are useful, she is incredibly unstable and, unfortunately, not that good of a character either. She's certainly useful in the early game. The lightning ability you get from her staff is a great way to destroy clusters of enemies, and Psychic Shriek also does a good chunk of damage. Alcat even went to the effort of using this at key moments where, so long as Idira is in the party, she can predict ambushes. The problem is, she is way, way too unstable to be left alone, and when this inevitably goes wrong in Act 2, there's no other choice but to take her out. This is exactly what 40k requires, given the threat posed by the warp. Given that Cassia quickly feels her role as the psyker and tactician grand strategist, doesn't trigger phenomena and risk damaging your party every 2 seconds, and doesn't jabber on about visions all the time, there really isn't much point to keeping Idira along for the ride. When it comes to the story side of things, Idira has probably the worst in the game. There's already little depth to her beyond the whole crazy psychic deal she's got going on, so the only thing the writers have left to do is try and explore her relationship with Theodora. But who actually cares? Genuinely. Who cares about what she thinks about Theodora, or Theodora herself? A distant relative you barely knew and died almost immediately. This culminates in an utterly pointless tangent about whether she should be shackled or lean more into her psyker abilities later in the game, but she's only made it this far once on my Iconoclast playthrough. There is no reason to keep her around by this point. She's quickly sidelined in terms of utility, and all she does is babble about visions and Theodora, so why would anyone keep her around for the story? She's not a terrible character, she's actually a fairly accurate depiction of psykers, and frankly should have been put on one of the black ships years ago. No, that's not a racist joke, idiot. They're actually called the black ships. There's just not much else to her as a character. When she goes crazy and Argenta gets her bolter ready for the Emperor's mercy, that's pretty much that. Good news is, things are looking up, because now we get to my favourite faction, the Sisters of Battle. God Emperor knows I'm a huge simp for the Sisters. I've gone into detail about that already, because who doesn't love the whole nuns with guns thing? But while generally you wouldn't see them outside of combat patrols and directly working with the ecclesiarchy, boy am I glad we got Argenta here. Trained in the Schola Progenium and later recruited into the Order of Our Martyred Lady, Argenta ends up with Theodora by happenstance through her work with the Drusians at Footfall, and later an encounter with the Cult of the Final Dawn. As a character, she's pretty much everything you could want from one of the Adeptus Sororitas. Constant prayer, unwavering faith in the lies of the Emperor, and she will laugh with abandon as she jibs heretics and the unclean with her bolter. Sadly, Alcat seems to have nerfed bolters down by 1.5 compared to what they used to be like. I wasn't joking when I said she almost single-handedly took out the final boss herself, but she is still crazy good as a soldier arch-militant with ranged weapons. While you'll certainly get moments like this, you'll also get moments like this.
Faith without deed, strike is a prayer. In thy light I stand, and thy light I crave. Eradicated. I'll do it. For you, my Emperor! As the Emperor commands.
You will pay
Doubt
for
is
this.
for the weak. As the Emperor commands.
In terms of her questline, she does suffer a bit, not because of the fanatical nature of the sisters, but because her goal is set so early on, and then it's just dropped for 90% of the game. Her story is a pilgrimage of sorts, pursuing a lost relic of her namesake, say Targenta, called the One Star, but it seems like Alcat didn't really know what to do with her, so talking with her about it in Act 1, compared to when you finally get to the planet in Act 4, nothing really happens in between. Even then, the quest itself is pretty basic. You have one combat encounter, and then she goes into the ship before the game jumps forward a couple of days. The One Star wasn't even that great compared to the power armor I'd already given her, but this is a perfect case of visuals being more important than stats. Don't get me wrong, by their very nature, Sororitas are characters that shouldn't really change, unless they've fallen and become Repentia or something. That's actually possible in one of her endings, but it's not a huge deal. She's a mainstay in my party just as much as Abelard. Considering you don't get Ulfa by midway through Act 3, and bolsters come with burst attacks by default, she consistently deals good damage, even if her accuracy isn't always the best. Hey, maybe she was just busy focusing on prayer. Now we get to the Lady Navigator herself, and my favourite companion in Rogue Trader, Cassia Orselio. Her premise is fascinating and completely unique. What if you took a sheltered Disney princess and added grotesque, powerful mutations? Cassia is best girl because she is able to ride that line beautifully between being somewhat naive, used to the luxuries of her noble line, with a kind of wonder as she ventures out with the Rogue Trader and sees the Coronis expanse around her. Her mechanical power should go without saying. First of all, the fact you can even get your void ship out of dry dock is solely thanks to her, but bring her with you in combat and she will wreck house. The Lidless Eye ability is insanely good throughout the game. She doesn't risk psychic phenomena, she's consistently giving the party new turns, buffs, and more as an officer grand strategist, and she has the best romance in the game too. Save for perhaps Visas Ma, Cassia is one of the very, very few characters in any game where the relationship is earned and the sex itself is secondary. She's so wholesome in the same way Arushale from Wrath of the Righteous is. You take your time with her, allow her to blossom and come into herself and her power in her own time, and most incredible of all, you actually court her. There's no immediately skipping to the steamy bits. It starts off slowly and she gradually begins to open up and reveal how insecure she is, about herself, about how she's expected to live up to the Atlas and the child, how she can't help twisting those around her and accidentally killing animals with her powers. On the surface, she might appear as a monster, but god damn it, Cassia has a heart of gold. I love her so much. The writing for her romance path is phenomenal. It might actually be the best I've seen in any game, hands down. I mean that without hyperbole, because she feels so raw and real. There are bumps along the road, she is second guessing herself, but then you can shower her with affection or help lift her up in moments of doubt, and it's so heartwarming to see her smile. Watching the love between her and the Rogue Trader blossom is genuinely rewarding, and would you believe, actually romantic. Genuine, heartfelt romance, because Cassia is the reward, not the sex or arbitrary points on a bar. Really, I could talk about her all day. She's easily one of my favourite companions in any RPG, right up there with Visas Ma, Kim Kitsuragi, and Garrus, and it should go without saying that from minute one, there's no reason to ever take her out of your party. Crazy damage, stacking turn after turn for free, a beautiful character arc that sees her blossom into everything she deserves to be, and a beautiful romance path that makes a mockery of all the other romances in comparison. Cassia is best girl. I reckon her and Arushale would get along. The AdMech are fascinating in 40k. Admittedly, I'm not as much a fan of them as I know other people are, but the transhumanist theme and the kind of symbiotic relationship they have with machinery, although less emphasis on the biological part of that equation, is another part of what makes 40k so unique. Pascal is hard to judge in that sense because he speaks in the similarly cryptic way as all servants of the Omnissiah do. If you don't already know, there's a funny implication in the lore that no one in the Imperium really wants to find out whether the Omnissiah they believe in is actually the same God Emperor the Imperial cult reveres, so it's best just to leave that as assumed. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm not that versed in the lore, so a lot of this stuff goes over my head, but Pascal is nevertheless a great companion to have along in the early game. He feels the tech use and logic skills, which is very useful for interacting with cogitators, hacking, and the like. In terms of combat, he's on the weaker side. His strength starts at something pitiful like 30, so I almost always spec him into ranged attacks with plasma weapons, and I recommend you do the same. Overcharge attacks are crazy good, and there are ways to mitigate the burst damage too. That little spiel about the lore applies to his personal quests because ultimately I feel kind of indifferent to it. Pascal, as with most AdMech, like the Skitarii, are alien by design. They have intentionally let go of the weakness of the flesh and prefer to speak in binary than Gothic. His questline actually plays a pretty big part for the main story, given that he achieves a kind of mechanical apotheosis through the many versions of his personality, or hardware, or whatever you want to call it, that eventually come together. Funnily enough, I actually forgot to do his final quest this playthrough, and only realised when I was midway through scanning a Necron tomb world, but overall, Pascal is a good character with some pretty lackluster abilities. He's middle of the range, quickly replaced by Ulfar once I get him and Cassia back in Act 3, and that's basically the last I'll use him. He does play a role in the secret path with Nomos, at least initially, but that's about it really. Heinrichs is a character I'll get back to when talking about my criticisms with the story later on, but for now he serves two purposes. One, to fill the Inquisitor role and the more formalized alternative to the Psycho like Adira, but also two, as a lingering reminder of Calcazar and the Inquisition constantly breathing down your neck. Mechanically, he's okay. He's a bit of an all-rounder and suffers for it. Four swords are great to channel psychic energy, and as a biomancer, he comes with healing and waves to buff strength by default, but he's just not good enough to justify losing out on other much stronger alternatives. Unfortunately, the same can be said for his questline. He doesn't really have a personal quest per se. As an Inquisitor, a lot of this comes down to playing a role in the main story rather than his own arc, but while you can push him to be more merciful, there's little reason to, when ruthlessness is the whole point, and exactly what the Imperium requires. There's not much else to really say about him, to be honest. His final quest is a great combat encounter involving mandrakes, and also explores the struggle between radical and Puritan teachings within Imperial doctrine, but like Pascal, his premise is more interesting than the reality, and I rarely use him once out of Rykard. So far, a lot of these characters have been focused more on the upper echelons of the Imperium and filling particular roles, so it's only natural that we get some insight into the criminal underbelly too. Jai is an interesting character, but suffers a bit because she's another example of what you see is what you get. The writers clearly had some fun with her character by making you go through the mind-numbing tedium of Imperial bureaucracy, all to get a bit of paper, but I frankly don't care about her or her gang, and I only took her along this playthrough for the sake of getting footage. Like Seela in Wrath of the Righteous, she ultimately ends the game the exact same way she started. You went out of your way to give immense trading power to a criminal, and when it comes to using her in combat, well, she's frankly terrible. Jai is spec'd into dual pistols, typically burst attacks, but thanks to Drukhari and Eldari proficiency, she can get access to some of the most powerful weapons in the game later on. But why would you take her with you in the first place? As a master tactician, the buffs are fine enough, I suppose, but Cassia already has you covered with the crazy amount of extra turns you can get. Ulfa and Argenta are handling range attacks, plus your rogue trader if you've gone that route, and almost all the skills she can cover are already done by other party members. So what's left over? Her accent, presumably Egyptian, and finery is the most interesting thing about her and the facade she puts on. If you like the Han Solo smuggler archetype, then sure, I can see why people might like her, but her story isn't memorable and she certainly doesn't have the mechanical power to make up for it. Snaking through the footfall sewers in her final quest is probably the best it gets, but not even the Casablanca mission even think she's worthy of notice. While not awful, Jai is a big, fat meh of a character, and spends the whole game back on the ship. Fucking space elves, dude. Look, I'm in two minds about Iliad. On the one hand, you have the constant, insufferable arrogance of the Eldar who think they're better than everyone, despite the fact that, they were that messed up to bring Slaanesh into existence. She's so goddamn condescending with every voice line. She betrays you to Marajai and the Drukhari, and she's constantly crying about her people and her stupid craft world and her spirit shard and whatever other stupid elf thing she has going on. But then you put her to work in combat.
Serves your cause.
I'm amended.
Another soul slips beyond the veil. I am not your seed. I deal death with my hands.
It's here. Even torches are fight.
This tedium is beneath. If it serves your cause.
God damn it. Fucking Xenos, am I right? Elias, and definitely not Iriles, like I totally didn't read it as for ages, is a pain in the ass, but I'll be damned if she doesn't bring probably the best and most consistent damage in the game. I've almost always played dogmatic characters, and frankly, you should kill her the moment you lay eyes upon her, less alone after she leads your party into a trap for the Drukhari, but as insufferable as she is as a character, she's a mainstay in my party, even if that has to come at the cost of listening to her talk. Like Heinrich's, her questline is linked with the main story and what is ultimately revealed to be Theodora's doings in the destruction of her craft world. My rogue trader would have given Theodora a high five if he could, because frankly, I don't care about the Eldari, although that's still more than Games Workshop, right? Somehow, I managed to progress far enough into the first of the whole spirit meditation thing, this playthrough with her, which was interesting, sure, but I just can't vibe with this character. I'm not saying she's badly written, by the way, quite the opposite. It's for that very reason I don't like her, and certainly won't ever romance the Xenos without Argenta having a fit. She doesn't endear herself to most players at all, which, yeah, is kind of the point. The Eldari and the Imperium of Man have a long, long history of animosity and think they're each superior to the other, but she's still crazy good in combat. Is that worth not putting a round through her skull the moment she betrays you, the moment she runs off? Each and every time she opens her mouth and starts jabbering on about the Eldari this, she who thirsts that. I don't know, but I guess I'm willing to overlook her shit if it means she can keep critting like crazy. Spec her into a bounty hunter and she'll just keep going and going and going. Eldari weapons are so worth it. Ulfar is the archetypal Viking warrior, which, to be fair, is exactly what GW made the Space Wolves to be. They're constantly singing sagas, talk about how much they eat and drink mead, Odin is switched out for their God Emperor analog, and they speak in a kind of bastardization of Icelandic on the homeworld Fenris. He comes later in the game, arguably at your lowest point as you're trudging through the pits of Komorra, but goddamn, was it worth the wait. This is exactly what Space Marines in lore should be. Unstoppable killing machines that keep going and going with crazy damage potential to match. It was fun just kicking enemies to death, and he's so big. He occupies 4 cells rather than 1. Even though he does come later in the game, this doesn't mean you're missing out on a strong character arc either. Like Argenta with the Sisters of Battle, arguably it's a bit of a stretch that one of the Astartes would follow a rogue trader, but there's sufficient justification for why he'd fall in with you for the time being to get revenge for his pack. Little moments where he interjects talking about his dislike of the Inquisitors, or gladly celebrating when Elias falls in combat, or one of my favourite moments when he wants Abelard to clean his armour. Ulfar is a very strong character in both utility and story. You probably won't pick up on this in your first playthrough, but you'll decide the fate of his character arc through the little stanzas he sings. Fighting the Hellbrute with him was a great moment, and although it kind of sucks that big werewolf looking thing happens in text rather than a proper boss, he's still a really solid character overall, with a kind of damage and utility that should go without saying. Remember, this is just one of the Astartes. One guy. So cool. Now we come to the last companion in the base game, Marajai. On paper, I love this character. Whoever voices him did an amazing job. Some people have pointed out before that he reminds them of Orpheus, which was a happy coincidence since I hadn't played that far at the time. But here's the problem. There is no way any reasonable person would ever bring a Drukhari on board. I've only ever done this once, and funnily enough, that was for the achievements of handing over all 3 companions to Heinrichs and the Inquisition, because Marajai is irredeemably evil. On Heretic runs, sure, go wild, but I cannot, for the life of me, understand why anyone in their right mind would trust a character like this. First of all, he's the main guy behind the attacks on your colonies. He orchestrates your capture and torture in Camorra, and then tries to kill you over and over again. Maybe that sounds hypocritical given what I just said about Ilias, but Marajai is so blatantly, comically evil. Taking a chance on someone who you can't trust more than you could throw him is an unbelievably stupid decision. This is the kind of thing that has brought down planet after planet throughout the history of 40k. Just imagine what a Drukhari with the resources of a rogue trader could do. Even the little I saw of him after Act 3 reinforces this. He goes nuts and kills loyal members of your crew, and Alcat is clearly trying to challenge the player about whether they're seriously that stupid to keep letting him get away with this scot-free. Why would you possibly take the risk? Hasn't the rest of Warhammer 40k shown you this is insanely stupid idea? From a role-playing perspective, it's even harder to justify because he is specifically the one that's been trying to kill you at every turn. The guy who captured you and brought you to Camorra. Marajai is evil to his core, and in many ways, I love him for that. But I never recruit him and kill him the first opportunity I get. And if you thought your companions weren't happy about having Ilias along, just wait for what happens with a Drukhari. Foul Xenos. Still well written though. As for the DLC companions, I can't comment on them since I haven't played either. Cabela looks amazing. I was actually looking to get Void Shadows this playthrough, but I'm a bit skint at the moment, so the refund of Underrail wasn't enough to cover it unfortunately. I love her character design. God Emperor knows I'm a sucker for a woman that'll kill me at this point, and I've heard she's absolutely crazy in combat with the amount of actions per turn. The whole death cult look is awesome. Please, Alcat, give us a Sister Repentia companion in Dark Heresy and I'll die happy. If there's any game you could justify it, it's one based around the Inquisition. Thanks guys, love you. Now we finally come to the story. Let's just skip the preamble and rip the band-aid off now. One of the few big criticisms I have with Rogue Trader is, like what I said about certain mythic paths and companions in Wrath, it simply doesn't make sense that anyone would stand by and let you get away with some of this. Certainly not the zealots of the Imperium. For context, Rogue Trader has a pseudo-alignment system between dogmatic, iconoclast, and heretical, which you can think of as by-the-book fanatic, humanist diplomat, and mustache-twirling chaotic evil, respectively. Now, dogmatic is fine, even if you're not a huge fan of the Imperium. This is how it generally works for most humans, at least if they don't want to risk corruption. But where things get really crazy is some of the heretical choices you can make. For example, this playthrough, because I wanted to see the loot and the early profit factor boost would come in handy, I pillaged Falstone and destroyed it entirely, instantly getting a level of heresy right there. Now, remember, Argenta is on the ship at this point, Abelard, along with the thousands of other people who have just witnessed you pillage territory of the Imperium, and no one says anything? This is the same kind of thing as recruiting Ilias when Argenta or Heinrichs are present. You're telling me these people who are zealots by design, especially Sisters of Battle, which abhor any affront to the God Emperor, wouldn't instantly kill you on sight? A faction known to resort to violence for the slightest transgression? Like Wrath, there's certainly grumblings from these characters. Basically everyone matches up with Ilias after you get back from Camorra and demands her execution right then and there, but the positioning of her as an outcast, let alone Marajai as I just went into, is not enough to raise some eyebrows at the Rogue Trader's actions. Sure, you can argue that this is because no one wants to mess with the practically divine right of a Rogue Trader, but remember, Sisters of Battle would throw themselves at Khorne himself. frothing at the mouth if anyone dared to question their beliefs. This is a setting that abhors corruption. Everyone must remain vigilant to the influence of chaos and the warp, and basically no one says a thing. Dramatic license is one thing, and as I mentioned already, I'm really not that versed with the lore, so maybe there's some grounds to justify this beyond the warrant of trade, but Cassia, Abelard, Ulfa, and certainly Argenta would lose their shit at the prospect of Iliet coming on board, let alone a Drukhari or a Lord Captain who has quite clearly fallen to chaos as a heretic. Remember, she didn't bat an eye in executing Theodora. Why would a heretic rogue trader be any different? There's a big old elephant in the room throughout Rogue Trader, and it's called plot armor. Anyway, maybe you don't agree, but let's get back to the story. Alcat always has really strong intros to their game, and quickly getting you installed as the new successor to Theodora and building the von Valancius dynasty as you move from one colony to the next is no exception. The theme park ride feeling is something we're going to get to in a bit, so bear with me, but the first few areas felt like a wonderful throwback to old BioWare games like KOTOR and Mass Effect. Janus's lush wildlife and picturesque forests is hiding the hedonistic corruption of Slaanesh. Kiava Gamma with the blatant corruption of Chaos Marines and monstrosities that its many factories have given birth to, and then Vibos 4, which brings us into first contact with the Drukhari. The first few acts are able to cover a lot of ground, and then, just like Alushanira, or the Underdark, or the Deep Roads before it, you'll plunge headlong into Komora, or Komora, however you say it. Much like those aforementioned games, this is a great way to reset the player temporarily and reinforce how insanely powerful you are, because don't worry, you're about to get even more so here. I hate that stupid coughing fit that interrupts you even if you pass the toughness check, but the good news is this won't last very long. The game amps up the loop big time from here on, and you're getting insanely powerful gear everywhere you look. The art direction in Act 3 is also a welcome change. Go on to the open skies, the settlements of Xenos or humans. Everything is jagged, wicked, and cruel. The Drukhari are funny because when faced with the reality they managed to fuck and murder Slaanesh into existence, they decided to take the if you can't beat them, join them approach, and willfully embrace evil and suffering, similar to the Drow. Of course, you get Ulfa here, like I mentioned earlier, and by the time you've let the warp into Komora, for once the Drukhari are having a really bad day. Into Act 4, it's essentially wrapping up plot threads now before you enter the home stretch. You'll get a ton of quests thrown at you at once, a problem that was also present in Wrath of the Righteous, as the story focuses on dealing with the Edge of Daybreak and the cult of the Final Dawn. Kalkazar being there in the background this whole time is something we'll get to a bit more in a bit, but there's not much else to say about this section. The cult of the Final Dawn, Aurora, Edge of Daybreak, and all that is revealed to be a Lord of Change, a demon for Tzeentch, in what is the hardest fight of the game. Admittedly, Rogue Trader suffers a bit from lacking any clear central antagonist. The cult is a group more so than an identifiable threat, and by this point, you probably forgot who Kunrad even is by the time he's sacrificed. It's in this home stretch where the game finally pulls back and starts to answer what Theodora was up to, what this yoke or epitaph means, and what Kalkazar has been doing this whole time. Now we need to circle back to lore again and finally address the theme park ride feeling that I've been mentioning throughout. It should be pretty obvious by now that I love Rogue Trader. It's a great game in its own right, and a dream come true for fans of 40k that have been getting mostly shovelware for years, but let's be real, the story is a whole lot of fan service strung together, and none more so than when we get to Necrons and the Catan here. I don't blame Alcat for taking the broad approach to the story. Clearly this wasn't half-assed. They obviously care a lot about the setting and the world and the lore, but it's not just the plot armor thing I mentioned earlier, but how do I put this? A lack of focus? We come up against Chaos Marines, Psykers, Pirates, Eldar, Slaanesh, Drukhari, Tzeentch, Khorne with multiple bloodletters, even Nurgle with that corrupted Inquisition ship. While I personally don't mind the greatest hits collection that I mentioned at the beginning, if anything, this is to the game's strength, and no doubt helped many players get into the wider setting of 40k. This really starts to push it with going up against Necrons, and the reveal that the Inquisition has somehow somehow managed to shackle a Catan. Now, to be fair, Alcat isn't alone in this. GW can't make up their minds about the gaping difference between factions and lore compared to units in gameplay, and this is also a video game, so no one's really expecting perfect realism from 40k anyway. That being said, even as someone relatively new to 40k, the moment a single shot from a death mark hits a companion, they should be killed instantly. And that says nothing for how we can hit and kill tons of Necron soldiers in this final stretch too. I've seen some people say they weren't happy with how Rogue Trader treats the lore or rulebook, and you already know what happened with a certain vampire game recently that did a whole lot worse, but it's really pushing the suspension of disbelief. I'm still barely more than a generalist when it comes to this stuff, so if anyone more versed in the lore is watching, feel free to weigh in on whether Rogue Trader really did all the factions and lore justice. It's fitting that all this well and truly falls apart when we fight an avatar of the Catan at the end of the game, essentially the closest thing there is to literal gods manifesting in real space rather than the warp. These things are on a whole other level of reality and power it's not even possible to describe. So 1. How on earth could anyone shackle this thing in the first place? And 2. How is it possible that we can fight or damage it to begin with? The Catan were a problem for even the Necrons, but now I can shoot it with my laser gun? We really are killing God. Rogue Trader ends with slides listing off the various outcomes for characters and companions. To the game's credit, there's even more variation here than Wrath had. Choices you made across the game can lead to vastly different fates, such as Argenta becoming a Repentia as I mentioned earlier. Ulfar can become a lone wolf or give in to the rage curse of his blood. Abelard stays at your side or retires to help run things at Dargonis, and it all ties out neatly. Again, I want to stress that I like the story overall. It does a great job in what it sets out to do, but it can't help but feel like you're on a ride from one 40k thing to the next. Hopefully Dark Heresy will mean Alcat can focus more in on individual stories rather than the broad appeal, and with any luck, this will be the start of all kinds of great RPGs in 40k. I'm certainly here for it. The worst part of Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader is that it took this long to get an RPG in the setting. It's clear Alcat poured as much love into it as they did the Pathfinder games, and while I'm ultimately more of a fantasy guy than sci-fi, it's hard to deny that this is a great game, pretty much all round. With a strong cast of characters, some excellent writing that really nails the themes of 40k, and understands the setting and core audience, not to mention gameplay so disgustingly powerful, it will have min-maxes and players brand new to turn-based tactics eager for more. Hopefully the team can pull it off again with Dark Heresy on the horizon. Please, Alcat, just give us that Repentia companion. No pressure.